Well, our next conversation on innovative pathways system level solutions is going to be as powerful as what we've been moving throughout the day. I'm honored to share the stage with Sundaa Bridgett-Jones, who you heard from this morning. Sundaa is the Vice President of the Americas and Chief Partnership Officer at the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. Dr. Mehalik, Executive Director of the Bridgett Project. Nisha Blackwell, Founder and CEO of Knotzland, Bowtie. And FitzGerald, Vice President of Strategic Partnerships and Public Affairs at Eos Energy Enterprises. As we've been doing, we'll move through a few questions and then turn it over to you for an interactive conversation to close out our day. Our goal with this conversation is to dive into some examples of solutions that address the complex, interconnected systems that drive climate change at the societal and economic level. We've already been kind of scratching the surface. I'm really excited to tie it all together with this panel. The innovation from manufacturing to fashion and other industries that can help transform our society to mitigate climate change is also something that we'll get into. Now, Matt, can you get us started? I'd love for you to get us going by grounding us in the work that you're leading in our region on climate, and then take a little time to share the innovations and solutions that you're doing.
Thank you, Betty. Thank you to the World Affairs Council. This is a conversation that, having it in such a beautiful day, really means a lot in this space. I've been on a journey for about a quarter of a century. When I started doing graduate research, I chose to look at a small textile company that wanted to save itself from closing because of global competition. And this was a group that involved a design firm in New York, a famous architect in Virginia where I was, and manufacturers in Europe. And they turned the environment as a way to save the business and produce a manufacturing process that saved energy and that didn't pollute at all. And this was something that was happening in the late 90s, and I was able to be a part of it. And it's been a wonderful thing to see the transformation of, at that time, I couldn't even get funding to write a business case on that at the Darden Business School at the University of Virginia, because they were teaching in the management class the best way to run a business at that time was Enron. This was before, so I've seen this shift happen over 25 years. And I grew up in Pittsburgh and moved back here and have been wanting to have conversations like this. And people who know me, I've been active in various spheres, pushing things. Where I am right now is the director of the Breathe Project. And we are a collaboration of about 65 organizations working to improve air quality and quality of life in our region. It includes frontline community group members. It includes public health professionals, many of whom are here at the Pitt School of Public Health. People who understand air quality monitoring and technology, folks at the Create Lab at Carnegie Mellon that have developed some cool apps that people can use. And we're all working together to improve air quality. And you might ask, why does it take 60 plus people in groups to do that? And it's because this is one of the most intractable, but in the world of sustainability, it is a regional, material, sustainable issue. Because the health of our community has been suffering for a long time. The U.S. Steel Edgar Thomson Works will celebrate its 150th anniversary next year. That is a facility that has been polluting and harming people for 150 years, okay? And climate pollution is directly correlated, tightly coupled to air pollution. The two trace their origins back to the combustion of fossil fuels, which we know is not a sustainable thing. So we are working, overcoming a history where the story of this region is steel making and heavy industry. and helping people realize, yes, we can continue to manufacture here, but that old model is not going to get us there, and we're paying too heavy of a price. So that's what we're working on collaboratively by bringing community voices forward. These are people whose families have been disrupted from cancer, from heart disease, from respiratory disease. If you go to the Mon Valley, it's devastated because of many things. The air pollution is indicative of a strategy of discounting people and harming people, and it's led to a hollowing out, driving away investment. So we need a different story and a different cycle in these communities, holding the people responsible accountable and figuring out ways to transition away from these harmful practices. So that's kind of what we're about, and we're trying to achieve that. So I appreciate being able to come here and share more of this.
Thank you for that important grounding. Sunday, you've been a part of incredible work around the world, crossing across continents. In your current role, and also the work that you've been doing for more than a decade at the Rockefeller Foundation. Innovation, inspired action, and some degree of disruption seems to be at the heart of the work that you did. So when thinking about our focus of this conversation, what comes to mind when we're looking at achieving true system-level solutions? Any bright spots that you've encountered in your work around the world?
Thanks a lot for the introduction, everyone. It's so good to be here. And as I mentioned, for those of you who may not have heard me earlier today, also being a student here, graduate student in ISPIA back in the mid-90s, dare I say. But good times. I think the work that we're doing at the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet is really looking ahead at addressing renewable energy and how do we find communities, as Matt was saying, the communities that are located in countries like Democratic Congo, Nigeria, like Brazil, Indonesia, Vietnam, where there are serious challenges relative to the shift from the use of fossil fuels to adjust energy transition. There's a lot of intention in doing that. And of course, there's a lot of conversation, and we heard a little bit about that earlier today, about where the emissions are coming from and the large amounts coming from the global, quote-unquote, global north. But in a short period of time, 75% of the emissions will come from global south communities if there isn't a change. And so what I think has been really fascinating when you look at International Energy Agency reports and others is the promise of renewables. It may not be the only solution, but I do think it's a part of the puzzle of being able to make this transition. And particularly the investments that have been made by the Rockefeller Foundation over the past 10 years, and their investment along with a few other philanthropic organizations into this new platform is seeing a good deal of cost effectiveness around the use of distributed renewable energy. Solar mini grids, looking at battery energy storage, looking at how do we consider procurement, bundling procurement with those kinds of DRE solutions that will be important for countries that without that bundling of it, making those orders are really blocked out of the supply chain, because a lot of those orders, et cetera, are actually going to wealthier nations and others with other resources to be able to access it. And so I see that as a really important part of the innovation moving forward, and thinking about how it is that there can be a collective movement, much described earlier today around the notion of partnering with companies and with multilateral development banks, with international organizations that really are looking to drive forward a renewable energy agenda to realize the cost savings that have taken place within this over the last few years. And I think a platform like, we call it GIAC, is critical in helping to do that, bringing serious risk capital, I guess you can say, to the table, philanthropic capital that is not encumbered by the rules of multilateral development banks like World Bank or the Asian Development Bank, or you name your bank in a particular region, that can offer a little bit of debt equity, grant capital that will allow for market systems to develop, I think, in the communities in which we serve. So that's what I feel is promising.
Thank you. Chad, let's keep going down the line. We started today's Changemakers with a cross-sector track with a conversation on leading the way in global action. And in some ways, we're coming full circle, getting away from you and Nisha and the specific work you're doing as innovators and redefining your industries. Some of the language that EOS uses to describe your work is, I'm going to quote here, designed for a decentralized, democratized, and decarbonized energy system, and deeply committed to maintaining a reliable and ethical supply chain. And you speak boldly of the ingenuity of your product and even named your manufacturing facility in Lamont Ingenuity Park. I love that. So clearly there's something deeper here that's at the heart of the EOS story that's very much about innovation and solutions that not only lead to radical change with your product, but it's also about how you do your business. Can you speak more to this?
Sure, thank you for having me here. After the world or the states or counties produce energy storage units, the question is what happens then? Who benefits beyond a cleaner environment and a healthier world? And I think that there's really got to be a strong connection between the pursuit of climate goals and industrial development who produces blue-collar jobs that can reinvigorate communities. And I can tell you a little bit more about our technology and the history of the company. It's interesting, but I'm going to call that. Internal Green, the exact footprint where Westinghouse was born 100 years ago, we are building out a facility. It's part of an expansion project that now has 350 jobs, has the potential to get to 1,000 jobs or more in the very near future based on orders for our technology. Our workforce on the factory floor, 90% are high school educated and trained on the job. 50% are people of color, 25% are veteran, and 20% are women. All the employees have a very competitive wage, 401ks, even if they don't pay into it, our company does, they immediately get stock in the company. They are owners of the business. And I'm not from the area, but I spent a lot of time here over the past 3 years. As you were saying, the cultural impact that we are having in the Mon Valley, and we're less than a mile away as the crow flies to the Edgar Thompson Works. The cultural impact we're having in the Mon Valley, I think, is really extraordinary. When you leave high school, you can either go to a 4-year school, or you might be looking at a fast food job. That's really might have been the options. But now, because of the clean energy economy, and a commitment to making components of the clean energy economy in the United States, in communities like Mon Valley, people feel like they've got a second chance at earning a middle class life where they live today. And beyond the cool parts of our technology and what we're doing to help usher the energy transition, I think the cultural impact we're having in underserved communities is so important.
Nisha, earlier in the conversation we were having just before, we were closing it out and coming to the importance of the circular economy. So I'm excited to hear more and have the audience hear your story and how you came into the creation of Knotzland. But first I want to ground this in a 2018 study by the Environmental Protection Agency that noted that the average U.S. consumer throws away 81.5 pounds of clothes every year. In the U.S. alone, that's an estimated 11.3 million tons of textile waste, which is equivalent to 85% of all textiles that end up in landfills on a yearly basis. Since founding Knotzland in 2015 through upcycling, you've built an innovative e-commerce company, and you've also rescued how much waste in the
Over 8,000 pounds.
Over 8,000 pounds. Tell us more about your story, your inspiration from Knotzland.
Yeah, so, I grew up being very resourceful. I didn't look at it as sustainability. I didn't look at it as something that I was doing for the environment. environment until I got into my mid-20s and thrifting became like a big thing, you know, and I started to research different terminologies around, oh, okay, so repurposing and reclaiming, this is something that is good for the environment. And I kind of had that in me, even from like a kid being resourceful using plastic bags over, and you know, just the way in which when you don't have a lot, you have to be very mindful of your resources. That is a part of sustainability. So I remember being intentional in my mid-20s and trying to like ignite this sustainability journey within myself and being more mindful of my consumption and how I use water and, you know, my purchasing decisions. And I would go into different spaces and not really feel like I fit in with that, the frame of sustainability as it was. So I started to think about ways that I can, you know, reshift that and change the language and create more accessibility around sustainability as a whole. So in creating Knotzland, I, you know, I didn't set out to be an entrepreneur. I started this Bowtie company really to make a gift for my friend's daughter. And I taught myself how to sew. And the first thing that I found to make, I was like, well, I don't have a lot of resources. What do I have? I had a sewing machine and a bag of thrifted clothing that I said that I was going to remake, and I never got to. And I was like, what can I do with it? So I started pulling the things out and, you know, seam ripping it, is what we call it in textiles. Seam rip it, and I'm like, wow, I have a lot of fabric here. I mean, just think about the fact that like our clothing takes a lot of fabric. And so I taught myself how to sew, made hair bows. At the time it was hair bows, and took them to a birthday party. The parents got excited. That was my first sort of, you know, spark of entrepreneurship because they started asking for these products. Like, you know, I left that party with multiple customers who started fulfilling orders. And then I started getting requests from the boys, and you know, this was like in May when I did the first hair bows, and then in June, July, August went by, and we started getting requests for boys. So we sent a bunch of kids to school in these handmade bow ties, and that's when I started to do like the sort of research that has built the Knotzland bow tie what it is today. Because you send kids to school with bow ties on, and they're not broken or, you know, all over the place, and they come home with them in one piece, you feel like you have a good product. So, you know, I stalked the parents and I saw like we were good to go. And then we started getting requests for dads, actually, and that's how we entered the mentor market. And, you know, we pitched to get into a startup accelerator, we got some funding, and it really challenged us to start to think about how to build a responsible company. And I knew that I wanted to take my ethics and values into the company with me. And so the first thing that I thought was, you know, I started this on using reclaim the thrifted things, so I don't want to go and get anything new. The first phone call I made was to the upholstery store in Lawrenceville, and like my mentor at the time was like, you need to find more fabric. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to find more fabric. So I built a list of people locally who made a fabric, and the first phone call I made, she said, come and get this bag. I am getting ready to put it out to the trash. Come get this bag of fabric. And it was beautiful upholstery materials, and so we challenged ourselves from the beginning to create these pieces out of, you know, unconventional things that would have essentially ended up in landfills. And fast forward, we've also embedded my own personal values into it as well, creating flexible work from home opportunities for our community. So we have a community of 29 women who we work with to stay home projects who sew from home. They're moms, students, retired women, sewing enthusiasts, and not only are they individuals who sew from home, but they become a part of this ecosystem for doing good and essentially accessible sustainability. And so even our customers, when they purchase a bow tie, they're not coming and saying, oh, I want to, they're not always. We do have a set of customers who say, I want a sustainability bow tie, but we have a lot of folks who are like, this is a beautiful bow tie, and then once the bow tie, this shiny object draws them in, then they learn about, you know, the importance of sustainability. A lot of our collections are revolving around terminology and things that we're educating the everyday customer around creating, you know, a more sustainable way. Speaking of terminology, can you just get into a little bit of what circular economy means and what it means to you in Pittsburgh versus other parts of the world, and travel around and experience circular economy? Yeah, so circular economy to me, you know, I read, when I started my sustainability journey, I read the manual book that was the first book I found around, it was called the Circular Economy, right? It was about creating jobs from, you know, things that already existed, and we explored all these things. It was my first time hearing about it in that way. And so I was like, how do I take these sort of themes and apply them to my own business and my own journey? And so for me, it is the idea of taking something that was deemed for trash and taking waste, putting it back into the lifespan and extending its lifespan. I mean, essentially forever. Hopefully, these heirlooms are passed down and no longer end up in landfills, but also creating meaningful jobs and economic opportunities for other individuals while doing so. Thank you.
Question for all of you, actually, whoever would like to get us going here, but what you're all sharing is incredibly inspiring. And we know that this is also really challenging, hard work, not always easy. Legislation can change everything in a moment. Educating folks who might be unfamiliar brings its own challenge, right? Folks who might be unsure, suspicious around what green energy actually means or can look like, and then that just can further make competition quite fierce. I'm wondering about all that it takes to have an ecosystem that supports innovative climate solutions. Where are we? Whether that's your particular industry or the communities where you work, what is the reality check of where we are and where we need to be?
Well, what I've learned over the years is to commercialize this new technology and enter a new market, which is the stationary storage market. So batteries, mobile purposes, exhibition purposes, will mostly be plugging into solar installations to make more resilient. The chain of activity in policy making goes all the way from towns. I know Mayor very well now, Mayor Fortin, and it goes all the way up to the White House, and it goes into international conversations. For a company like ours to compete in the international trade marketplace with competitors overseas who may not have the same sort of standards that we have to treat our workers, to use the right type of energy, to have the right type of environmental impact, to have the ability to recycle your product and things of that nature. It really takes the complete chain of leadership, all the way from international conversations to the White House, into Congress, into Harrisburg, and on the community level. That's been really stunning for me, because if you have one component of that chain not working as much in context as humanly possible, it can make it very difficult for American manufacturers of anything, certainly American manufacturers of any technology to be competitive. So the full chain of how we think about this is really important. I think that's why conversations like this, as they occur in these rooms, and then they go to leaders that we all touch and influence, are really important.
I'd like to just add on that, just building on it, because just thinking about the experience that we had at the Global Energy Alliance and working with governments around this. There is that policy framework that's critical there, and the thinking that you mentioned in terms of the chain of understanding and intent. I think for us, thinking through the North Star metrics, figuring out how do we avert 4 big things or reduce 4 big things of GHG emissions. How do we get a billion more people access to electricity that don't have it? How do we think about enabling 150 million jobs in a way that we've been hearing a little bit about here? And I think at the heart of that is the just aspects of it. Looking very carefully at equity piece, and thinking about how do we prepare or support the preparation of communities from small communities way up to national level for this clean energy revolution that's ahead of us. And that means some people will be in and others out. We're working in South Africa, for example, where we're helping to speed up the decommissioning of a coal-fired power plant called Kamati. And the biggest question is not about technology in that power plant and all that. The biggest question are the people who worked in that power plant, and the community around that, of course, rely on those who are working in that power plant. So all of a sudden, it's a shift in conversation, not about those technologies only, of the decommissioning and thinking about its use moving forward, but it's actually about reskilling and thinking differently about the future of employment in that particular, and livelihood in that particular community to be able to benefit from what will be a clean energy source at some point. So I think that just equitable piece of the transition is really important for us to consider at the center of our efforts.
Thanks. At the core of circular economy is rethinking what investment means. Now, there's some principles that can guide it, but a perspective to keep in mind is when you make an investment, you build things for a long time. This room that we're sitting in, Woodrow Wilson visited this hotel. Okay. There are systems that we live a part of and among that have been built and have been here for 50 or 100 years. Most of our economy is built without thinking about any constraints of what such an investment would be. So no one was talking about the global refugee crisis from climate change when, large-scale industrial systems were built throughout the 20th century. It wasn't even on the radar screen. And so those of us who are thinking about circular economy, yes, we look at our own behaviors, we look at what we buy, we look at how we conduct ourselves and efficiently use resources. And we also think about what we collectively demand is invested in, because those systems will be here 50 years from now or 100 years from now. And if you start thinking in those terms, then some investments look a little bit different. So if you're looking at investing for 50 or 100 years from now, renewable power makes an incredible amount of sense. It's almost like a no-brainer to be investing in that in large scale. It also makes less sense to invest in any fossil fuel related infrastructure, because the fossil fuel infrastructure is also going to be outcompeted in a very short period of time. Electrolyzers producing green hydrogen, where you split water molecules apart. The latest economic forecast that will be the cheapest way to make hydrogen by the year 2030, maybe 2028. So why in the world would we invest in a hydrogen production system that requires billions of dollars of investment that will be here for 30 or 40 years, that would be reliant upon methane? You see a lot of arguments for investing in methane-reformed hydrogen now, because we can do it now. Take a step back. If in 4 years that's going to be the less effective way to produce it, then maybe it makes sense to pay just a little bit more now and start building what needs to be built, so you can decarbonize heavy industries. So our steel industry. I just did an inventory of greenhouse gas emissions for Allegheny County. The biggest source comes from the Mon Valley Works, 3 plants. It's more than half of our carbon emissions from the industrial sector. Okay. Why would we invest in a system that would extend the use of fossil fuels by promising a carbon capture and sequestration system, which is a Rube Goldberg system that hasn't been proven to work well effectively for storing carbon really anywhere? But our Department of Energy has provided a $4.3 million grant because U.S. Steel showed they can capture 1 ton of CO2 in a lab using a carbon capture and sequestration system, whereas the Edgar Thomson Works produces 5,000 tons. Okay. Let's leapfrog over that. Let's retrain workers so that they can be working on the new things that need to be built, so that they'll have their job for the long haul, not a
And so with circular economy, it comes down to fundamental questions of health. What makes communities and people healthy for the long haul? It's typically not working with fossil fuels. That is a recipe for continuing health harms and harms on communities that have borne that burden for the long term. It also is looking at how communities that have borne those harms, maybe they deserve a little extra investment so that they can be lifted up instead of with another layer on top. And then finally, on a material sense, looking at producing materials that are compatible with ecosystems. So that's not plastic, okay? We have to get pretty real about plastic. Plastic breaks down. It's in all of the water supplies of Pennsylvania. They've studied every stream in the state of Pennsylvania, and they find microplastic. Okay, this comes from washing your clothes using a pod that has a plastic wrapper on it, and you throw it in there, and that plastic breaks down into microplastic, and it makes its way to our rivers and streams eventually. And it accumulates in our food supply, it accumulates in fish, and it does disrupt hormonal systems. So a circular economy needs to be compatible with human systems and ecosystems, and we should be investing in them for the long haul and make those choices today.
So I am on the conversations around investment. Like, being a sustainable fashion designer isn't the most invested in space, but when you think about it, like, fashion touches every single one of our lives. Every person in here is wearing a garment. And so the challenge for us has been really uphill, because when you think about like creative solutions around textile waste, us being able to repurpose and reclaim and rework things is essential for, especially everything that's already out there and already been created. And so more investment in small entrepreneurs and micro entrepreneurs, and even more investment in entrepreneurs just in general around climate challenge, I think is going to be important in the future. I mean, what we do in Knotzland is we mobilize communities to become a part of it. So that mobilization has now allowed us to create even more entrepreneurs. I mean, we have folks who go out and create and have offshoots of their own businesses in using fabrics and textile. We have sourcing partners who give us textiles and we find textile waste. We have all these different offshoots of individuals making products. And so, that investment piece and that policy piece, and I would also say creative futures require creative solutions. And us becoming more embedded in conversations like this, we're not always the type of table, it's like, oh, you're creative, you're over here, you're doing art, you're over here, but like having more inclusive conversations around, policymakers and foundation folks and government folks on space.
I want to go back to something that I read following COP28. There's a headline in The Guardian, and it ties into our conversation around innovation and support. So the headline read, "Magical Tech Innovations, a Distraction from Real Solutions." Climate experts warn. We know that there were some big decisions that came out of COP, and someday you were there, and I'm sure there's in this room, and there were lots of divergent thoughts also that were spoken. What do you all think when you hear this discord around real solutions? And what do you see as the role of COP? So there's two questions in there. Will COP as a framework, as a gathering, is playing an important role, complex, big role in advancing the climate conversation? And then also this discord, this separation around rights or real solutions versus not.
I have two questions. So this is super important. So it's a question. Up until now, really for the past 20 years, the only commercially available technology to power either global or stationary devices was lithium-ion. So if you are writing a procurement or permitting standard, or any rules in the road, whether it's for an EV car or a solar plus storage system, of course you will write it based on procurement of the environment. Eos is the first commercially available alternative to lithium-ion in the world. The technology goes back to the late 70s. Exxon started the idea and died on the shelf. But we made it very hard to pivot. It's this pivot from the R&D phase of your company to a commercial production phase of the company. It's really difficult. It's kind of a bit of a waste where a lot of companies just don't make it through. Sometimes it's because they have the right type of investor shifting from the R&D side to the production side. But it's one of the things that we're working through. And again, this goes all the way to international conversations in places like COP. It requires a careful balance, like you were explaining, on what's real and what's not. And it can be difficult sometimes to figure out what's truly going to be commercialized and what isn't. And sometimes it's a little bit of luck and just good corporate leadership, which we've benefited from. But if the market doesn't really understand, and all policymakers, all the way down to the county executives who are controlling these technologies, if they're not aware of solutions like ours, which are better technology than these long duration batteries that can discharge for 12 hours. Our batteries are 80% of American supply chain. The electrolyte solution in there is a water-based electrolyte. It will not catch on fire, and the toxicity is similar to Coca-Cola. In the components, because there's no common materials and there's little volatility in the components, the battery can be easily recycled and so it's a better technology fit for the stationary storage use case. But up until now, a lot of the conversations I have, whether it's like Sundaa in New York or the CDC in California, a lot of times the conversation I have with them the first time they're there, there's a commercially available alternative. I will say that federal support for the right types of methods at the right time are critically important. There's lots of investor dollars in almost the kind of VC area. There's less attention to putting the money to building factories and building core infrastructure, helping build out supply chains. It's not as sexy or interesting, and especially in the United States, because there's been more money for innovation rather than execution. We've made it through that, but it really is a very difficult moment of time. We have something commercially available to make sure the market understands it and embraces it.
Yeah, I call it a little bit the Olympics of R&D innovation, where you have people like Bill Gates and others who are doing something called breakthrough solutions, where they're putting a little bit of R&D capital into these new things that are coming up. And that article of Guardian referred to various ways to do carbon capture, whether it's about carbon credits or other things that are taking place. But I think that COP is a place where there is deep understanding and accountability around change that is underway already in our world. And so when we actually listen to the scientific, assessment of where we are, it's an opportunity to continue to deepen our understanding and knowledge around what is happening around us. And for us to figure out, I'm not sure if someone said this earlier today or if I heard this the other day, is acting now with the things that we know work. And there is space for folks to think about what's ahead. But we are in a situation where we have to truly act now. And in the markets in which our platform works, across Asia, Africa, Latin America, Caribbean, there's a lot of attention being given to actually repeating industrial policies and other kinds of investments that the US or China or others have done over the past years. And there is also an argument that they make around a transition that includes things that actually don't allow for that leapfrog, like gas, the use of gas, for example, particularly in those countries in Africa. But one of the things that I think COP could be important for is around industrialization policy, because that's going to impact so many people who will be victims, unfortunately, if we don't make a change in many of the governments and how the governments are making investments for their own economic interests.
There's a lot of really good things shared here today. Just to get a little bit specific here, we see a lot of talk about blue hydrogen and carbon capture sequestration. So one thing that people need to know is blue hydrogen is mostly a concept. Okay? People talk about it. Really what is mostly blue hydrogen is really gray hydrogen. Making hydrogen from methane. The carbon capture part, which is supposed to make gray hydrogen blue, isn't very much deployed. It's a promise. It's something that adds extra energy that needs to be used to make a system like that work. All of the systems that have been tried, they capture hydrogen, they capture carbon at a much lower percentage than what's forecasted, and they underperform. So really what the blue hydrogen systems are is a way to perpetuate fossil fuels. It's a way to make it seem like what's being harmed, what otherwise would be harmful is being less harmful. It's kind of like a filter on a cigarette type of concept. So, folks need to be aware of that because a lot of money is being thrown at this. We, as taxpayers, are subsidizing this because of decisions that were made 4 or 5 years ago in congressional appropriations and bills that have made the Department of Energy move forward with some of these things. Okay? We, as a region, need to be smarter than that. Yes, we do have a lot of fossil fuels in our region. It's our history. But that is also where we need to be careful, where those resources need to be thought about what is their best and highest use, and what we should be doing alternatively and investing in those areas. That's where the policy decisions need to be reset. Unfortunately, our region's policy, the report released in 2023 called Our Region's Future by the Allegheny Conference calls for 0 reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, including carbon, in the industrial sector by the year 2030. 0. The power plant sector reduction had a modest 15% reduction, but they chose the year 2019 to start accounting because the Cheswick power plant is still operating at that time. The Cheswick power plant has closed already, and so all of the electrical sector reductions have already been achieved for our region. So no aggressive advancements in that area either. Now, where our area has done better is efficiency in buildings, which is great. We need to continue to do those things. There's a clear business case for those things. And they also typically improve public health when we do that as well. So we need to recenter on investing in decarbonizing industry. It starts with renewable energy. That's something that our region can achieve. And businesses that are here to support an infrastructure to make that a possibility can grow and will prosper.
Thank you.
I have one last question, and then we'll turn it to the audience. Let's go back to that kind of magical thinking that was suggested in the article. But in a serious request, if there was one wave of climate launch moment, what is something specific? And Matt, I think you started a short list on your specifics. But what is something specific that you would both want to see that support your work?
Yeah, it really is this idea of, a report came out 2 years ago. Pennsylvania has the highest number of deaths per person because of fossil fuel industry pollution. Our state is ranked worse than the entire country.
Our county is the number one, in the top 1% of counties for cancer risk from toxic air pollution. That is a tragedy that continues to perpetuate itself. If I were to wave a magic wand, it would be our policymakers understand we need to go in a different direction where the health of local communities is primary organizing framework for decision making and align our regions of investment around those priorities. That would make people who are here working to make our lives better local, rather than people being pitted against one another. Well, if you take jobs away, that is an artificial framing for how our region's decision making should happen. So that is the magic wand. And it's really not that a whole lot of magic. It's really people having conversations about
I think in that vein, my wand would be waved around bridging that gap between what's happening here in Albany and what's happening in places like the DRC, in the economic sector, because we're dealing with the same sets of challenges and really seeking to figure out at the end of the day how to create a better livelihood for ourselves and for generations ahead. And so the kinds of learnings, the available technologies, and not just in terms of that include process, right? Process technologies and the way in which we work together, I think are really critical for the kind of advancement that I think many of the countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America are seeking to have. And I think part of that one, just to close it off, is really understanding the supply chain for the new technologies that are coming out and seeing equity in that. Because the more that we continue to have an equitable approach to looking at the availability and accessibility and the affordability of those advancements and those innovations, I think we'll find ourselves having to address the continued poverty that I think challenges us all, right? In terms of being supporters and providing farm aid and those who are receiving it. So I think that would be part of
I'm trying to wave a magic wand. I produce a deep commitment from the people here, as policymakers can, here all the way to the top world, everywhere else and beyond, to make sure that the energy transition and climate goals are directly connected to industrial development. So there is going to be a strong push for the energy transition in America. It should be American made.
It would be just the fact that the communities that are disproportionately affected by climate injustice are Black and brown communities. And there's no secret about that. And I would love to see more folks from our communities being represented in leadership positions, at tables, and decision making, and as advisors on projects that directly impact us and our futures. So that would be my magic wand, is to have Black and brown folks at the table.
Thank you to our incredible panel for all of your incredible insight, expertise, and inspiration. Really, if you can join me in giving them another round of applause. All right, if you have any questions, I'd love to see your hands, and Keegan will help to run the mic. I see Robin over here. Get us started.
Thanks for the comments. So the big elephant in the room that we haven't talked about is consumer and the thirst for consumers in the U.S., which drives energy, sustainability, everything else. The question is on capacity. So Nisha, awesome. There's a lot of innovative companies in Pittsburgh that are dealing with sustainability. same thing in the world. But I guess I'd like your comments on, if all of us in this room make conscious decisions when you're consuming, and not by price, but by where it's made, how you can use it. And I think your example of the 100-year-old building is a great one, is how do we gain capacity, in your opinion, here in the region, here in the country, and around the world, to eliminate that mindset of cheapness, which actually is contributing to the bad stuff, right? I mean, we complain about $3 a gallon of gas, yet we don't walk or take public transportation. The capacity is my question for all of you.
I can speak to this. So you're right. So as an emerging technology, it's recently being commercialized. Eos has a pretty interesting story. Number one, if you only use, at the moment new technologies are being commercialized, if you only use what's cheapest or what's readily available, you do miss an opportunity to produce something that's actually better for your community. So I'll give you a kind of an interesting example. We're on the early stage of full commercialization. All of the commodities that go into our batteries, as I said before, are readily available, and the battery is easily recycled. And we're just starting to see economies of scale drive down the cost of our components and our batteries. But it's really important to make sure that you're making the right kind of investments in new technologies, and not just go to the lowest common denominator, because we'll get stuck in the same areas we were doing before. So the interesting thing about that is we need kind of full commercialization of what we commercialize. What's interesting is it's 60% cheaper to produce 1 gigawatt hours of Eos energy storage than it is for comparable lithium-ion technologies. So once you scale, it's dramatically cheaper and way more efficient than these systems. But when you're thinking about that balance between capacity and what's available, you've got to make some decisions. And you were talking about what's going to be best in 2 years, 4 years, and 6 years to get to the best 50 or 100 year solution.
Yeah, I'm going to get a little wonkish here for a second. Economists have looked at which decade since the 1870s was there the greatest increase in productivity growth. And what they found was it was actually the 1930s when that happened. Okay, it's counterintuitive because the 1930s is when the Depression was happening and so on. But economists try to probe why was there such productivity growth in the 1930s? And it's because it took 40 years for the industrial ecosystem to take full advantage of the innovations that happened in the 1880s and 1890s, which is electrification and combustion engine, which allowed decentralized use of power. It changed the way power was used throughout the industrial system. And it is no accident that Westinghouse was one of the places where this happened. In the 1930s was really a big decade for Westinghouse. So why am I bringing that up? Your question about scalability is one that's complex because there are going to be synergies that happen in investing in different parts of this industrial infrastructure. Decarbonized sources of power, decentralized sources of power, and then the infrastructure that's going in, including workforce, that for the first 10 or 15 years, we might not see the big pop. But if you plan it right, then these breakthroughs will start achieving at-scale increases like we saw in the 1930s happen in the United States. So economists have also shown that, and this is part of the story that's difficult to hear, is that a lot of the big breakthroughs we've achieved, and they're forecasting much slower productivity growth overall, because
the low-hanging fruit for major innovations they view as largely been plucked away. It really is renewable energy and recentering things around health that will achieve some of the things in the economy that we need for the long haul. It requires rethinking what we describe as needed returns on investment. So there is a reconceptualization that needs to happen now, thinking about investment in infrastructure, because the patterns of the past are not likely to continue.
Yeah, and I just want to add, like, consumerism. The word consumerism is Mehalik, the consumer. So the more that we demand companies change and we buy the things that are well-made versus, we educate our families and people around us to buy things that are well-made and going to last for a long time. I think about even when someone comes to Knotzland, they're like, oh man, $50 for a bow tie, $85 for a bow tie. I can directly pull out another competitor's bow tie and show how it's not as well made, and this is going to last for a very long time. And I think a lot of independent and small designers and small manufacturers are thinking about retail because we kind of have to in order to be competitive. We can't really be competitive on price, we have to be competitive on longevity and quality and detail. So that, I mean, it's like you said, very complex, and it takes a lot of education and a lot of, just pressure on bigger companies to create better products too, because, everything we purchase can't come from small independent, our budgets just aren't set up like that. But if bigger companies are also trying to match that quality and going back to when things were well made, that I feel like that is really, really important in this conversation, at least from fashion and consumer goods standpoint.
I love that. It reminds me of this morning Sunday when you were saying, nothing else about our intentions. Start there. There's a question with the shirt in the front.
Yeah, this is mostly for Nisha. I'm sorry. Is anyone in the world really envisioning a whole textile, I wouldn't say industry, but textile? And so who is it, or who could it be, and how could they really prioritize environmental benefits as well as quality and consumer satisfaction? And how could they have the power to kind of work through this whole vision so it actually happens?
Yeah, so that is very complex, as with everything environmentally related. So I think from what I see, the fashion industry is divided into multiple parts, right? But some of the biggest parts are like the consumers and like the fashion as entertainment, and then there's the fashion as and the production side of things. I don't think there's a lot of connectivity between the different realms of that, and that is the problem, is you have people being treated unfairly, workers being treated unfairly, waterways, every single step of the way, it's just like terrible. And then you have the magnification on the other side, is what we all see, and we watch award shows and things like that, and we're not making that connection between like who's actually making the garments, and I think more of that is needed and more transparency around the process and like what it really takes to make something from start to finish. And we're not there at all. And I think the system sort of thrives off of that, right? Thrives off of the disconnect between the two, because had we known, if we know like that someone's working in a sweatshop or someone's not being paid fairly for the stuff that we're wearing every day, then we would think twice about what we're purchasing, and also not just what we're purchasing, but what we're throwing out as well. See the floor.
I guess one of the things I keep thinking about is I read that about 3/4 of the public school students in the city or the county, I'm not sure, are from economically disadvantaged families. And I was just kind of shocked that the statistic was that high. But I also feel like that's where it starts. Put your money where your mouth is, where your children are.
anyway, so that, to me, that just connects to a lot of what people have been saying. The children are the future, and I think part of the job that adults have right now is to reframe, re-articulate, help to re-envision with everyone what is this American dream that people have been brought up on, and is that really relevant in any way? And that's a collaborative labor of love that I would love to see around the world.
So, open question, anybody?
So, I think the American Dream for maybe 45 years as we've been able to work is really based on access to a 4-year education, whether or not one desired we really have decided a long time ago that making stuff American was important. We were going to have a digital economy, we were going to be involved in services, we were entertainment, things of that nature. And there were a lot of bright shining stars ahead of us as we went in that direction. But the simple fact is, if you didn't go to a 4-year school for the past 40 years, you really had a very different place. And for a lot of people, that wasn't their direction of life, or it wasn't attainable. 4-year school at the same time, more and more expensive. And to get back to my personal experience at Eos, we decided that we could make stuff competitive. And we have 400 people on our factory, we're a big in Boston, Chicago, or Silicon Valley, and I think one of the things that we can do is make a pivot back and say, we're going to create economies here in the United States, and industries here in the United States. So that if you decide to go to a 4-year school, we want to turn out to college, we would take back for the middle class. I think that's the key for all.
Comments I want to make, just echo and support what you were saying, feeling maybe all the comments that you made. The economists look at the decades from the 1940s to the 1970s. And those they call the Great Level. This is when inequality in the United States was at its narrowest. The gap between people who had the most and the least was at the smallest gap. And they trace this not only to investment in industrial infrastructure from World War II and World War II, but also to access to education. So it was a period of time where schools were built, the access to high school education became available to many more Americans, and high school education was the jumping off point to being able to work and earn quality of life that is sustainable. And there was also the GI Bill for people who came back from the night of the war. Those folks had access to a college education that had free. So, at the heart of this is we've tolerated a degree of growing inequality that deprioritizes our basic education system, access to health care, access to jobs that are sustainable, and is resulting in disinvestment. We know what the answer is to change those priorities and invest in them. And economists have proposed that very thing, invest in our children and their schools so that they can achieve better learning outcomes and access to education. I think on the list, we're somewhere of developed countries, like we're like 30th on the list of developed countries for educational performance and achievement. Whereas, 30 years ago, we were in the top 5. So, this shows the inequality policies that, have resulted in the hollowing out of what has made the United States, the envy of the world, most overall. And so reinvesting in them policies makes sense. It is going to mean, however, changing some policies that might make some people uncomfortable. At the end of World War II, the top tax rate on top earners was 90%. Okay, Now, there's probably some room to go from the 0 to 10% that many wealthy people pay to, 30%, 40%. There's also, inheritance taxes. We've seen an erosion of ways in which people pass along wealth intergenerationally that wasn't permitted, post-World War II. These are uncomfortable topics, but it does reflect the value of investing in society as a whole, where everyone is better off. And we need to have those conversations.
All right, with that, these are all uncomfortable but hard conversations and meaningful and important ones that we need to have. I'm so grateful to be closing on today's conversation with you all. Thank you again to our panel. You can join me again in the